Hello and welcome to another webinar training. Today we've got a special guest, Joanne Cleaver. We're going to be talking about how to get your education company, more specifically your courses, your training-based membership site, your coaching program, whatever it is, how to think about and use the news to your advantage. Joanne Cleaver has been a freelance business journalist since 1981. Her stories are regularly published in national media outlets such as AARP, Publications Inc., and many others. She is a frequent contributor to the opinion section of the Chicago Tribune. She has authored 7 books, including 3 on small business growth. Her most recent book, The Career Lattice, is the basis for her forthcoming online course about the power of lateral career moves for individuals and employers. Welcome to this training webinar. I want to thank everybody for coming. Joanne, thank you for coming and having this presentation day. I'm super excited. Thanks for coming.
Thank you.
And
All right.
I'm going to do just a few more things just before we get into it. This is being recorded, so if you can't stay all the way to the end, we will be doing a replay. If you're watching this on the live stream, there's a link if you want to jump over to the Zoom. We are going to be having an opportunity for Q&A at the end, so if you have questions, go ahead and just drop them in the chat as we go along. And if you're watching this in Facebook, just leave a comment over there. We'll be keeping an eye on that as well. We're really lucky to have Joanne with us here today. All her experience in journalism and writing in the news industry is really special and something that you can leverage and just think about and challenge your assumptions around how all of that works. So stick around at the end, drop lots of questions, use the chat, use the Q&A box. We'll have a Q&A at the end. And stay to the end. We are going to be doing one of our LifterLMS $99 giveaways. So if you are around the end, we're going to randomly select one of the people who's still here at the end and do that giveaway. But Joanne, thanks for coming. I'll hand it over to you. And by the way, when do you want us to drop the link for the handout? Do you want us to do that now or later or what?
I'd say when we start the Q&A, because the handout summarizes the slides, but also includes some really helpful story links that illustrate some of the main points in the deck.
Perfect. Well, we'll do that at the end. Thank you for coming. Take us to school today.
Wow, thank you for that gracious handoff. I'm so delighted to be introducing myself to you folks. As Chris mentioned, my course is in process, and I'm probably going to be introducing it in July. I'm really excited about it. It's something I had in the back of my mind from when my book came out in 2012. I thought I've got to get this out there to a bigger audience, and I'm excited to translate what I've done for corporate training to the virtual realm. But that is based on my 39 years of being a professional journalist. And I met Chris in the process of writing a story for a magazine that I occasionally contribute to for freelance journalists, the American Society of Journalists and Authors. It has a quarterly magazine. And in the interest of killing multiple birds with one shot, I thought I would research my interest and my desire to translate my book to a course by doing a story. So I met Chris in the process of doing my story research, and he did a couple of things right in that interview intuitively that I bet you guys are doing right as well. Well, the backstory of Use the News workshop is that as a journalist, I'm constantly looking for fresh sources. I'm looking for people like you, and my colleagues are looking for people like you too. But there's a big gap from the business community and journalists in terms of what people are looking for in terms of story ideas and what the sources can bring. There's a lot of frustration on the part of professionals and entrepreneurs in terms of how do I get in on a story? It's like, wait, that story just came out. That should have been me. Well, how do I even get myself in front of an editor? So my goal for you today is to give you 2 strategies for working up angles that you can use to start approach media, whether it's local media, like your local business paper, maybe the local like if there's a business show in the local radio station, I know the places where I've lived, PBS is always doing, the local PBS affiliates always doing stories about the local economy. And also podcasters and social media folks, bloggers who will do original content. I'm going to put them in the umbrella as well of media, because they tend to use the same criteria for who they choose to showcase on their shows as traditional media. So when I say media, I'm including social media, professionally produced podcasts and blog writers, as well as writers, editors of traditional media like newspapers, wire services, magazines, and their digital counterparts, as well as broadcast outlets. So we'll just assume that media includes traditional media in all its forms and channels of distribution, as well as kind of the new forms of media, because everybody intuitively is looking for the same thing. They may not call it the same thing, but they are looking for the same thing. So now here we are challenging our ability to actually, God, okay, why is this not, there we go. Okay, sorry. All right, so here's a story that just came out in the Wall Street Journal. Coronavirus lockdowns spark boom in online learning for adults. This should be your sweet spot, right? This is the kind of thing that's exactly where you folks are at. So let's unpack this story a little bit so we can see how these strategies, and you already know more than you think you do about these strategies. So here's the opening of the story. From her home in Portland, Oregon, Peggy Dean purchased her iPhone on a tripod. So she's talking about, it kind of puts her in the moment. The business is selling skills online, from art to coding, has been booming. That's the hook for this story. The big picture is that lots of people are doing this, and then people are making money. So why is she the one who's featured in this story, and which is accompanied by a chart from Udemy about the most popular topics? And you can see that online course creation is in the top 10. So this story is in your sweet spot. This is the kind of thing that you are going to be gunning to get in on, because people like Udemy, big companies like Udemy, are putting out universal statistics that you can hook onto. But why was she picked to be in this story? How come this story did not feature somebody else like you? Well, let's unpack this. Well, first of all, the story outlines an overall trend, and that's really important. We'll be coming back to that in a few minutes. That hooking on to a trend that's bigger than you provides momentum and an opportunity for you to be an example of that trend. Secondly, she's a regular person, right? So she was chosen to be in that story partly because she's Peggy. It's like, okay, if Peggy can do it, anybody can do it. It's kind of the undertone of the story. But there are also a couple other reasons why she made it into the story, and that you can use the same strategies that they used to put her in the story, you can use for yourself. And the bigger picture of all this is, why is it worth it? Well, it's worth it because you understand that being in a story intuitively provides different type of credibility than other types of media. So I've been in this business for 39 years, and I've seen it from all the angles. I've reported tons and tons of stories. I've interviewed thousands of people. I've written 7 books. I just finished ghostwriting my 3rd book with a fintech executive. But I've also been on the other side as an author being interviewed. It's a really, really different process. And it was really scary for me at first, because I'm sitting there thinking, oh no, they're going to do to me what I do to other people. This is like not fair. I am not prepared for this. And having the tables turned on me really made me think differently about how sources come to the process. And the more I learned and started exploring how I could get my message out, that it made me better as a journalist. It gave me more empathy for the people that I was interviewing, and how that they don't know what the rules are and how to pitch themselves. And it made me realize that there's really an opening for this sort of workshop. So my motivation for this workshop, I have a couple. One is just to help my profession get better sources. The more you know, the more confident you'll be, and the more useful you'll be to the journalists that you approach. And that's going to help them. And I want happy colleagues, because I'm tired of them complaining. But another thing is that you also need to know what to do in the interview. I sell media training courses. There's the pitch. Okay, so here's the big picture. Why it's worth it to get into a news story, because it is risky. I've been misquoted. I know how it feels. I'm getting better about that. I'm getting better at applying my own rules to myself, but I understand very well how it feels to be misquoted. So basically the 4 buckets of communications are peso. I'm going to go through this really fast because we really want to spend our time on the E, the earned media. So paid media is advertising, right? Earned media is, so earned media is the one that we're going to spend our time on. Sponsored media is like you're affiliating with an event, like you're sponsoring these days a virtual webinar. And O is owned. That's the stuff that you completely control. So earned media is unique because you do not control it. So the PESO, paid media advertising, you pay for the space, you put into space what you want to say, and everybody knows that you're paying for it. We'll come back to the E, with sponsored media, everybody knows that you're choosing to be affiliated with that event. So if I sponsor NASCAR and now they're not allowing Confederate flags as a sponsor, I'm relieved, right? Because I'm like, thank goodness, like that whole affiliation is cleaned up, for my audience. But I don't have direct control over that. I mean, we can surmise probably that some sponsors had some say in that. I don't think NASCAR came to that conclusion completely on its own. But as a sponsor, you don't have direct control over that. You do have direct control over the O, which is the owned media. So that's your marketing collateral. It's your website content, which is super important for working with reporters because that's the point of reference that they have for confirming factual accuracy. Everything has to be correct and consistent on your website. But we're going to spend our time today on the E, the earned media. You don't own it and you don't control it. You don't pay for it. So why is it so valuable? It's valuable because it creates a halo effect. When you're quoted in a story, you know intuitively as a reader that that person who's quoted was chosen, that there are other people too who could have been quoted in that story. But the reporter or blogger or whoever chose that person to quote because of their expertise and their relevance to the topic. Everybody has a strong intuitive sense that the process of putting together a story is fractious, that there's a lot of jostling, that there are a lot of people who want to have a voice in the story because of the reach and the implied endorsement of the story. So if I say I got quoted in the local business gazette, that's good. But if I say I got quoted in the New York Times, it's a lot better. You can imagine that there's a lot more competition and that the New York Times reporters have a lot more people to choose from to quote in their story. So there's an intuitive understanding that being quoted in a major media outlet, really any media outlet, but anything where the reporter chooses you and you make it all the way through the edit process, that you're worthy. And that's the implied endorsement, the halo effect. It burnishes your reputation. It builds credibility. Somebody else is saying this person is an authority. This person is worthy of quoting. And it also builds social media because, of course, you can share those links. You've got stuff to say, on your social. But here's the secret thing, too, is that, now you guys know this, so most of the audiences I speak with don't know this. You guys do know this, that being quoted in the media builds deep SEO. So I did an experiment a little while ago. I was the staff editor for a while at the Milwaukee Journal-Sentinel from 2004 to the end of 2008, so almost 5 years. And that was over the course of the real estate run-up and meltdown. And I was in charge of the real estate section and other sections as well. So it was really interesting. We did a lot of great coverage, won national awards. It was a big deal. I really enjoyed it. So I occasionally wrote some stories when they would let me. And I wrote this story about using style. Basically, it's kind of a standard story. It's a little bit of a space filler. Just basically, styling a house to sell it. And, it's an evergreen, right? I mean, the story could run today and it would still be relevant. So I went back 6 years after that story ran. And I thought, what if I had vaguely recalled that story? And I just stuck in my name, and I knew that story ran in the Milwaukee Journal-Sentinel. I knew it was on the topic of staging, and I actually showed up right away. So when you are quoted in a news outlet, Google, et cetera, all the search engines put a higher value on that, and it really drives deep SEO. So you're not only reaching that audience in the moment, but you're also reaching audiences for a long, long time. It has a really long tail and a lot of echo effect. So those are some pretty compelling reasons to pursue media coverage. But there also are risks. And the risks involve making sure that you don't make an idiot of yourself when you pitch. So how can you understand, what insight do you need to be able to peek inside the editorial process and prioritize what you can bring to the reporters, editors, bloggers, etc., that they can use? I've organized, this is the way I do it, and seeing how I taught news writing at Northwestern, I think this is probably pretty valid. This is basically how I organize my need for information, and all the colleagues I have who are, again, reasonably well connected. This is how we intuitively organize what we're looking for. First of all, you need data or facts. So in that story that I opened with a gal who was making money off of her Udemy course, there was a chart. So Udemy broke out the top selling courses. So that's pretty compelling. They know their data. The LMS community probably doesn't have the same sort of scope of data, but there's no reason why you can't use bigger trend data like the Udemy data or Teachable produced data, that you could use that data to make your own appeal. So hard numbers are very compelling. There's a reason why there's all this attention paid to the unemployment numbers, et cetera, et cetera. Those hard numbers tell us something. Sometimes they tell us that the government can't count. But aside from that, the hard numbers and data is really, really important. If you can quantify something, if you've done some research that will hold up to scrutiny, not just like some lightweight Facebook, poll. I mean, reporters are smart. Nobody cares about a Facebook poll that's just basically some random whoever dropped by. It's like, that's not going to hold up. But you want real research data. You have to be able to show your methodology, and it's totally fine to hook onto data that's produced by a trade association or a related organization in your field. So if you're producing courses, you have two different types of data that you could tap. You could reference the data from a bigger competitor like Udemy, say, hey, they're out here doing this, and they've kind of defined this trend. There's more than one way that this trend plays out. Here's what I'm doing that's within the umbrella that they've created. Or you could also look at what some of your customers or clients are doing. So if you're finding that you have a lot of clients that are in a particular industry, say the logistics industry is using courses to teach safety for warehouses or something like that, and you're finding that there's a big burst in that, you could approach their industry. So if you've got a particular, if they're saying, we're trying to figure out how we're going to transition logistics training from literally on the warehouse floor to virtual, and they're producing statistics about that, then you can approach a publication and say, hey, this industry that I have a lot of functional expertise in has got this issue. Here's evidence of this issue. And guess what? I've got expertise on this topic, which leads us to the next thing that we need. So you've got the numbers, but what do they mean? I mean, so what? So what? Unemployment is up, down, sideways. What does that mean? So what? The logistics industry is now transitioning. They've seen their online, their on-site training drop by 50%, and yet they all have to continue to qualify for federal standards and OSHA and all this kind of stuff. What are they going to do? What does that mean? You have to be able to bring your expertise to that point. So the data is the hook. The expertise gives you the commentary. So after that, you want to be able to produce some kind of example or case study. So in the Wall Street Journal story that we opened with, that gal is a case study. She's a living example of the statistic. She's absolute gold. She's also a regular person. So we in the media business love regular people. The more regular, the better. My goodness, she's sitting there in her, her living room with this very, she's got her phone on a tripod. It's like, oh my gosh, it's crazy. I mean, it's practically your grandma. So any example or case study that puts a little story around your expertise and or the numbers is gold. And finally, how-tos and tips are also golden. So they sound, I find that people who are really professionally accomplished look down their nose at how-tos and tips. When you go to your kitchen next, and when you're done with this fabulous presentation, and you go to get a drink, take a look at the refrigerator. Because if you have anything posted up there that you've taken from media, it's going to be a how-to or a tip, right? Unless it's like, you know, your kid graduating. But how-tos and tips have unbelievably long tails. They get shared over and over again. One of the underlying drivers of all that sharing is that there are tons of syndicates now. So I'm writing for a publication these days called Digital Privacy News. Awesome timing on their part. They debuted in late March. They're a nonprofit newsroom supported by a foundation. They have money. We all like that. And they are, as part of their distribution platform is that they're getting distributed by Yahoo News. So when I contact sources for stories about the implications of the recent pandemic legislation on credit reports and stuff like that for businesses and individuals, I'm telling the potential sources, look, the story is being put out by Digital Privacy News. You haven't heard of them, but these stories have reach of 100,000 plus more per story, even though the publication has only been out for a few months, because they're syndicating. So how-tos and tips get syndicated endlessly. That's the stuff that gets shared over and over and over and over again. And it's a little bit counterintuitive, but the how-tos and tips, you know, if you can deliver a couple of pithy takeaways, just think about anything that you'd stick on your refrigerator, the reporter will say, thank you so much, because it also drills down the relevance of the statistics and your expertise and the case studies to what do I do with it now? What is this reader supposed to do with this information? The how-to or tip gives them the takeaway. And the reporter, for many, many stories, has to include some kind of takeaway. Or there might be a follow-up story that's just about takeaways, or a little additional story called a sidebar that's just about the takeaways. So those are the 4 buckets of information that we're looking for as reporters. So when you're earning your way into a story, you can't buy your way into a story. It's not advertising. It's not paid media. It's not owned. You're not putting it on your website. You're not producing marketing collateral, and you're not sponsoring something. So that takes care of the P, the S, and the O. Everybody knows that you pay for that, you control the message. But how are you going to get in on all these benefits of media? Well, these are your 4 categories. So when I talk with professionals about how they can get more media coverage, and I love my clients, people automatically gravitate towards wanting to talk about what they know, their technical expertise. And there is a need for technical expertise in stories. But there's actually a secret side door to getting coverage. So first we'll talk about technical expertise, because that's what people tend to want to gravitate towards. I do a lot of work with the consulting industry, accountants, lawyers, professionals, and especially with women who are in the leadership pipeline and being promoted. And people are thinking, well, I want to get in on a story, but I have to prove that my time was well spent. What's my return on investment? Yeah, I understand I can't buy it, but I still need to show that there is a return on this effort for gathering the statistics, coming up with a case study, applying my expertise, and ginning up some tips, right? It's like, what am I going to get for this? And there's pressure as well. If you're in a big organization, your clients might be facing this. Oftentimes there's pressure from the communications director or your boss. Was that time well spent? Or if you're an entrepreneur, you're thinking, I don't want to waste my time. What do I want to get out of this? I want to get clients, right? So all of that kind of anxiety, and also not completely understanding how stories go together, tends to come to bear with an urgency, and if people put a lot of pressure on themselves to position themselves as a technical expert. So my favorite example of this is, and I swear this is 100% true, I literally fell asleep in an interview with somebody in front of them. I was younger at the time and I did not have as much faith in coffee. I was interviewing an international consultant on the topic of international tax swaps. And it was in an interior room and there was a lot of white noise and I fell asleep right in front of him. You do not want to be that source. You do not want to be that person, because he just went on and on and on and on and on about all the technical aspects of this. And he committed the absolutely fatal mistake of saying, before I tell you what I tell my clients, I need to give you the backstory. And I was out. I was just like, oh my gosh, I was totally out. So the technical stuff is important because for some stories in particular, especially a how-to story, the readers may really want to know that. There is an audience for accountants who want to read about international tax swaps. My audience was not that audience. I was writing for a general business audience who wanted to know what are some of the complications of expanding into Europe as the EU was organizing. This is a while ago. And a good example of this is tax time. There's a lot of stories in March. Oh no, April 15th is really close. Oh my goodness, how did it happen so fast? Oh, here it is again. We need tax tips for retirees, tax tips for parents, tax tips for entrepreneurs. Obviously, your expertise is going to lead with that. But one way to think about whether or not you're leading with your technical expertise as your only hook is, do you have a license or do you have a certification or did you take education in this? Because if you did, a ton of other people did too. That's not a differentiator for you. There are tons and tons of licensed accountants. There are tons and tons of people who know how to do web design. There are lots and lots of people who are doing course creation, as we saw in those Udemy statistics earlier on. There's tons of people who are trying to crowd into this category. The fact that you have the ability to work with WordPress plugins is not a differentiator for me as a reporter. I can find people who know how to do that. So it's a baseline qualification, but the conversation has to be about a lot more than that. So if the story is technically driven, if the reporter, if there's a point in the calendar where you're thinking, oh, this really is an urgent time, for example, the tax deadline is an obvious, deadline is an obvious point in the calendar when people are going to be looking for stories about taxes, then revert back to those 4 buckets that reporters are looking for: the data, the case studies, the analysis, and the tips, and try to come up with an angle that's unique to your perspective on solving those problems, on dealing with that technical stuff that can at least differentiate you from people who say, I'm a tax accountant, I know taxes, tax season is coming up, what do you want to know about taxes? I mean, I'm already asleep, I'm done. Forget it. And so the technical elements can be important. And I understand that you feel a lot of internal pressure. I've got to make this thing work for me. I'm spending all this time. I need to get clients. I need to show the clients what I do. Dial it down, because it's a better way to get coverage. And that is who you are. So technical expertise is what you do. Lots of people do what you do. The fact that you do it is not a differentiator. I'm not impressed as a reporter. I don't care. There's tons of you out there. But who you are is interesting, because there's only one of you. It's your personal experience, it's your relationships, it's who you are, how you operate in the world, and the intersection of your technical expertise and other points of view that you have because of who you are that make you a unique source. So who are you? You're a business owner, you're a mentor, you're somebody who's concerned about your community. Pretty much all of us are parents or children. We're all children. Many of us are parents. Many of us are siblings. You have friends. You're committed to issues, your stage of life. You've got a young family. You're an empty nester. You've got kids in college. Your interests, your personal history. All that stuff gives you a unique perspective that completely adds dimension to your technical expertise. Your technical expertise is the baseline. It means that the reporter isn't going to be embarrassed to quote you, but it doesn't differentiate you. This is the stuff that differentiates you. So another thing that is really underestimated is the gender difference. So stipulating that we are kind of a crazy moment in American history where diversity is a flashpoint politically, it is still true, and here is a statistic that I can give you the resource for if you wish, that women are only 18% of sources quoted in business and technical stories. So for stories that are social stories or crime stories, advocacy type stories, women are quoted a lot more often. And as you might expect, stories that are about or that relate to professions or stages of life where women tend to predominate, like teaching or mothering, women are quoted more often. But you are interested in reaching a business audience. And if you have women in your operation, if you're a woman who's actually running the company or has a significant role in the company and can speak authoritatively on your own, not just putting somebody out there just because she's a gal, but somebody who has actual real experience, you have a much greater chance of being chosen to be in the story, because reporters and editors are looking for gender diversity. So I've been doing this presentation for some time. This has always been true. This number, unfortunately, has not really changed. But even right this minute in America, right in our country right now, there's enormous controversy within newsrooms that's being reported in major media about diversity and coverage of diversity. And we've got these big editors, Anna Wintour at Vogue magazine, which I confess is not my read. She's apologizing for being a jerk, basically, and not advocating for women of color in her organization. We've seen some major resignations. So if you've got anybody who's not just the standard, what you'd expect for a web developer, a white guy, that really will help, because editors are proactively looking for diverse sources. So, and this is, I recognize that this is touchy, but this is also the reality. These are the conversations that are happening right now in American newsrooms. Editors are saying we have to get more women with female voices. We have to get more people of color. We have to get more Blacks, Indigenous, et cetera, et cetera. We have to more fully represent the people who are reading the publication and make sure that we're really cognizant of all that. So the temptation is to, say, oh, like, who can be our spokesperson? Well, this person obviously has to be qualified. You're not going to help your cause if you put somebody in front of a reporter who is thinly qualified or young in her job, who can't really speak to the issues that are going to come up. But this discussion does put a fine point and really a strong sense of urgency to looking at who's representing your company out there. And it's an opportunity, even if your own process is, we're really trying to address this in our community. That can be kind of a sideways, a side door to getting some pretty powerful coverage by saying, this is something we really need to think more about. Can I work with a community college on web design? Can I work with some of my clients to put together a mentoring program for the industry that we all operate in? Anything like that that shows advocacy, awareness, sensitivity, and empathy to what's happening right now and takes some action shows you as a leader, and then your technical expertise becomes part of the introduction of who you are. So just think about that. I recognize that it feels very treacherous, but this is the discussion that's happening in the newsroom, and it'll be frustrating if you aren't aware of that, because decisions are made about who gets included in stories on the basis of diversity. And it's very controversial within newsrooms, because you don't want to create a false impression either. Like I read a survey a couple of years ago that Fortune 500 CEOs thought that diversity was solved among the Fortune 500 C-suite. Now it's like, well, that's news to me, because I don't think that's the case. Certainly running into a lot of the traditional types, when I do interviews. And they were like, oh, no, this is taken care of. We're good. My organization's awesome at this and we're good. Well, there's tons of evidence, statistical evidence, that is not the case, as well as my own experience. And then shortly after I read that study, I picked up a copy of the Wall Street Journal, and I read, it's like one of their leadership special sections, and literally it's completely gender balanced. And I was like, well, this is interesting. Half the photos are women, half the photos are men. Half the voices are women, half the voices are men. And I thought, oh, okay. So we're changing the perception by being so concerned about diversity, that we are part of the problem because now we're presenting a false reality to the readers of this section. So it gets really complicated really fast, but just to know that this is a dynamic that's top of mind right now in newsrooms. When you go to present yourself as a source, this is part of what's on their mind. Okay, so back to Ms. Dean, who we opened up with this the Wall Street Journal story about the Udemy trends. Well, why did they pick her? Well, let's see. She's a woman who's leading a course. So they were able to find someone who actually had experience, who had something to say, who's a woman. They led with a woman. There you go. It's a business story, and she's opening it. She also did a lot right in terms of talking about how she presented herself. She talked about what she charged, and she talked kind of implied about her income. You will have to disclose information that you might not be comfortable saying. I can tell you that a complete deal killer for including somebody in the story is if they say, oh, I definitely want to talk about my awesomeness as a lawyer or as a web developer, but I'm not going to talk about how many clients I have or how much money I make or what my business growth trajectory has been. I'm just like, well, then you just wasted your time, because I need to know. I need a sense of where you sit compared to your competitors. I need to have a sense of how accomplished and whether or not basically what you're saying is working for yourself. If you're so awesome, you ought to have a pretty good business record, and I need to know that. So you have to be prepared to self-disclose some of these things that might be less comfortable. And if you aren't interested in doing that, if it feels to you like it's too much, then don't even try. Don't waste your time. Don't waste the reporter's time. It's just a non-starter. It's just crazy. So she was willing to talk about what she charged, and she said she makes 6 figures in teaching online. So she didn't give the exact number, but 6 figures is way more than the average reader would think that someone who's a former hairstylist is just tossing out these short videos would be making. You're just like, what the what? How did that happen? Okay, so she was willing to talk about that. She's a woman, so that was a little bit of goes against what the average reader might have expected. So that's going to grab attention as well. And she sounds fun. So I pasted together several mentions from her in the story here. So she talked about keeping bloopers in her videos, and they gave her the final quote. She says it's really important to show up authentically. It's not the most elegant quote, but it shows who she is. I mean, she's just kind of like la-di-da out there, like doing her thing. And she's kind of fun, right? I mean, she sounds like somebody that you might think, okay, I would spend a little money with this person, because even if I learned just a little bit of stuff, it sounds like she would kind of brighten my day. So you want to get a sense as, that's how she got chosen to be in this story. She got the lead and she got the final word, and she exemplifies the trend. Udemy is saying, hey, we've got all these people. You don't have to have, amazing superstar skills. This is not masterclass with, all these famous authors and producers and stuff, telling you to, and I kid you not, write books that people want to read. I was like, well, thanks for that. That's helpful. She exactly exemplifies all of the statistics and that Udemy is putting out there. So when Udemy says our platform works, she is exhibit A. So who in your clients can be exhibit A, who can literally show your work in action? This is a wonderful case study of how what the story is about, the trend. Udemy is the platform. They're the ones that make it happen, but she's the real person who benefits from it. So they very wisely put her out there as this, as the winner who used their platform to become a winner. You can do that too. You've got Chris, you've got LMS, you've got the power of being a local business owner. We've got this insane economic situation right now. We've got the trend that's established by much bigger companies, that online courses is a thing. And you've got the skills that about the industries that you're working with, that your clients are, your clients are in. You've got tons of insight on tons of things. You understand how entrepreneurs are pivoting. You know how you've pivoted. You know how this has affected your family. People who are working from home, you're probably talking with them all the time. And so you're thinking, oh, there's tons of coverage out there right now about how crazy it is to work from home. If you're hearing like a commonality in what people are telling you about working from home, there may be a story in that, especially if you've dealt with it yourself. I guarantee you that we're at the point in this news cycle where we've already exhausted the storyline about children interrupting, and we've already exhausted the storyline about pets interrupting. We've already exhausted the storyline about being distracted by food. We've also exhausted the storyline about being distracted by gardening and Netflix. If there's a distraction that's not one of those things, an editor is probably interested because people are still distracted and they're still at home, and we're done with the pizza, the kids, and the dogs, and the flowers. Okay, so you can use your expertise as a baseline for some circumstances and some types of stories. You might lead with it, but in general, it's going to be a baseline of credibility. You've got who you are as an individual, and what you're interested in, your point of life can all be parts of the story. And you've got trends that provide hooks for information. Hooks for approaching an editor. So let me tell you a little bit about how all that can come together in this particular story. I was doing a training for a bunch of home stagers. And, these are people who, you've got a house, you want to sell the house, your furniture is awful. The real estate agent's horrified by your furniture. They get this furniture out. We're going to clean the carpets. We're going to put in some fake furniture, and your house is going to look awesome. So the house will look great in the listing. And then, you'll get all these people buying the house and not being distracted by your horrible furniture. Okay, fine. So that's what they do. So they were really worried about about how they could find the right moment to be pitching their services. And I said, look, you've got sales cycles, right, of real estate. We all know that when you're selling a house and, much of the market is being driven by move-up buyers, that it's, in traditional times, pretty much determined by the school year. So people try to sell in the spring, they want to move in the summer, the kids are going to start school in September. And, that for a lot of families, that becomes their expected pattern of that transaction. And that frames, for many people, especially in the North, the home selling cycle. Okay, fine. So what if you approached, and these stagers are like, let's see, this event was like in February. So the stagers were very concerned about trying to get in the news cycle in time for the spring selling season. They're really anxious about that. I said, okay, ladies, what's coming up in spring? Mother's Day happens every May. I guarantee you that by April 15th, as soon as tax season is over, the typical editor is like, oh my gosh, it's Mother's Day. What are we going to do? Oh, how could it get here so quickly? It's on the calendar. It happens every year. And I said to the audience, this is about 150 people, I said, do we have any mother-daughter staging teams here? Oh, we did. We had 3. What if you approached your local news outlets and said, and we know it's hard to get stories for Mother's Day, and we also know it's hard to get business stories. We're a mother-daughter team, and we love working together. We'd be thrilled to talk with you about some of the challenges of selling a home with kids, and how families can sell homes, because we've done it ourselves. My mom was learning on me when I was a kid, and now my mom and I, both apply what we know to our clients. And it was like 3 hours before they had a major feature assignment, because they were able to integrate the point on the calendar with their technical expertise, that they know what they're doing. But the real lead was that they're a mother-daughter team. So another example is, and I was doing a different training, and it was in July. And I said, look, if I was a nutritionist, and I went to the Chicago Tribune, which I still write for a lot, even though I live in Charlotte. If I went to the Chicago Tribune and said, I am a nutritionist for Kraft, which is, Kraft, the food maker, Kraft macaroni and cheese, they're based in suburban Chicago. I said, if I went to the Chicago Tribune and said, I'm a nutritionist for Kraft, please write about me, the Tribune would be like, oh my gosh, I can't even. It's like, what am I supposed to do with that? I mean, who cares? But if I said, I am a nutritionist for Kraft, and this is how I pack my kids' school lunches, and this is July, and you are needing to plan back to school coverage. And you know what? The next day, that exact story came out. So just speculating on what might be a great story, and it happened right there. So you're looking for the intersection of the timing, the platform of technical expertise that you have, and that who you are as a person who can bring that extra insight to that. So how are we going to find out what breaking news is? Because kind of like the easiest way, to be honest, to get in on news opportunities, and you don't just want to have to wait for the obvious things like Mother's Day, Father's Day, 4th of July, the tax season, Christmas is a big one. Those are really helpful. And you can definitely work up some advanced story pitches based on those holidays and based on points in the business cycle, like the home selling season. But there's also a lot of breaking news. So there's a couple of services. One is called Help a Reporter Out. Another one is called Quoted, that basically put out news blasts several times a day, depending on what you subscribe to, where reporters literally say, I'm a reporter and I'm looking for XYZ. I'm a reporter looking for a comment on why people don't comply with dog leash laws when they walk in the park, and that would be a follow-up story to that whole Amy Cooper situation in Central Park a couple weeks ago when she tried to call the cops on the African-American bird watcher. So that sort of breaking news, but there's a whole business section in that. And in the handout, there's some links to these sorts of opportunities, and I've got one coming up here. So when you approach them, when you subscribe to these services, and they're free or very low cost, of course they've got escalated subscriptions, but you can get a taste of it for free. Think about not just introducing yourself in terms of, oh, I'm a WordPress developer, or whatever, but think of yourself in terms of who you are, your personal experience, your unique perspective, because of all these roles that you play, community member, business leader, entrepreneur, parent, spouse, partner, etc. And even if you don't get picked for that story, you've now got that reporter's contact information, and you can start up a conversation. You don't want to be difficult, but you could say, hey, let me know what else you're working on, because I've got some interesting things going on. I've noticed this thing in my industry. Or you can at least get a little sense as to what their reporter is looking for. If they're covering the sort of thing that made you respond to their HeyRo request, chances are good that they probably have other stories that you might fit in. So here's a sample Help a Reporter inquiry. This came out in February. And you can see that the media outlet is Entrepreneur Magazine. They have a really big online presence. I've written for them on and off over the years, not recently, but over the years. And they're saying, okay, marketing is a constant game of change. Those who stay ahead of the curve win. Writing an article about innovative ways to market in 2020 focused on technology. Okay, I would think that you, from your experience as a business owner, might have a couple of thoughts on how that could work. So the question that the reporter is throwing out there is, what should brands pay attention to stay ahead of the technology curve in their marketing campaign? And he threw out a few examples, TikTok marketing. I mean, honestly, really, okay. So let's get some Q&A going here. If you saw this come through and land in your inbox, how could you respond to this inquiry based on what you know or who you are? Just type in, and Chris, help me out here with questions coming at us from both Facebook and...
So how could we market in 2020?
Yeah, if you saw this response come into your inbox and you thought, okay, I'd like to be an Entrepreneur Magazine, and this reporter is saying, what should brands pay attention to stay ahead of the technology curve in their marketing campaigns?
I'll tell you what I would say. I would say,
Yeah.
well, education-based marketing has been going on for a while with ebooks and white papers and email-based mini courses, but now online courses, a more curated, structured form of content, can be used to, teach about your products both before and after the sale. So that's like one way like how to do education-based marketing for a brand through online courses, free online courses.
Okay, so let's stay with that for a minute. So how would you, do you have a client example that comes to mind that you could give me? So I understand how that works for you to
Yeah.
get quoted on the topic of your technical expertise, that you're awesome at supporting this structure, but how does this really help your clients? You said
I,
before and after a sale. I understand the before, but what about after? I'm not sure I understand how that really, tell me how that plays out in the market.
well, I would talk about a case study of ours with
Mhm.
Adrian Toby from a software company called Groundhog, where he was having this huge problem. What he thought his software was easy to use, but regular people didn't find that. So he started creating free courses to help people understand what they were buying before the sale. And then
Mm.
after the sale, his churn rate, which is what we say in software, the amount of people we lose every year,
Mhm.
reduced by 40% after he added his free training courses about his product.
So this guy used a course more to keep clients than to get clients.
Both, but yes, it was more of a retention thing than
Yeah,
a
that's interesting.
yeah.
That's really, actually, I'm very interested in that right now as a reporter. And the reason why I'm interested is because marketing, it goes to kind of the long tail of marketing, right? It's like marketing typically focuses on getting people in the door. But if they're going out the back door, even just, at almost the same rate that they're coming in the front, that's your churn, then that's not a net gain. So you're saying that online courses are actually more powerful for the long return on investment in that in marketing. And that's an unexpected and overlooked benefit of investing in online courses. Is that right?
That's right.
That's right. That's how we do it. So I know, right? You're welcome, America. That is my superpower.
John,
And all of a sudden now I've got a hook,
yeah.
but because you gave me the example and it adds nuance to this angle, now you're talking.
Well, let me just tell you another one. I think this is more for the marketing side, for the front
Hmm.
before the purchase. There's a LifterLMS customer. Her name is Angela, and she was trying to retire, and she was a house cleaner, and she spent uh, like 30 years cleaning houses and realized she didn't have enough money for retirement and didn't want to be on her hands and knees cleaning houses forever. And she learned business and she grew quite a nice house cleaning company. And within 4 years, she created a membership site powered by LifterLMS to train other house cleaners. But she also built a YouTube channel based on free daily videos. She now has over 75,000 people subscribed to her free YouTube channel. And that's how and she's not a techie. And she did all that in 4 years. I find that pretty amazing.
So what I love about the pitch you just gave me is that you intuitively used that YouTube metric
Yeah.
to validate her success.
Yeah.
So you didn't have to invest in your own research. You didn't, I mean, there's tons of metrics. There's too many numbers out there, in my opinion, but there's tons of metrics out there. But that was a good one because it sounds like a lot, 75,000, followers or whatever, subscribers for house cleaning, when that information is kind of out there in general, kind of out there in the world, a bit. I mean, that's actually fairly impressive. And it's YouTube, which everybody knows that brand. So that is a really good way to validate the case study. But let's drill that down even more. So if you wanted to approach an editor and so initiate the coverage, what would be a couple of topics that are in the news right now that potentially could get an editor's interest based on her experience and her life situation? Because it's about who she is as well. I mean, the
Well, she
YouTube
had,
metric validates her approach, but who is she?
well, she had to, first of all, like with the Financial Times and all, she had to create her own retirement.
Thank
And
you.
second
Thank
of
you.
all, she had to pivot her own business model to more online just for the COVID safety approach. And now she's helping her house cleaners who are running these companies figure out how to clean houses while maintaining social distancing and all of that.
So she's become the house cleaner whisperer for enabling a whole category of women entrepreneurs to fulfill economic independence despite the pandemic and the resulting economic chaos. Is that what I've got?
Yeah.
Yeah, that's what we've got. That's exact. And actually that's, you know, that whole category of people who are looking at their retirement plans and the shambles that, you know, their plans are in. That's the market that I'm going to be going for with my first course, which is going to be Lattice from staff to self-employment in 5 steps without, you know, with minimal economic risk to your own financial future. That's a story that I'm guessing maybe Entrepreneur Magazine would be interested in, because this gal is a little older. It's possible that like there's a statewide publication in wherever she lives. So it's partly, you've got 2. We've got where you are because there's interest because you're in Maine. And I know that there are Maine-wide business publications because I read them, but also where she's at. If she's outside of Maine, then you've got 2 categories or 2 markets where the same pitch might work for regional publications in each, like the equivalent of a business journal.
That's awesome.
Yeah, but also
go
all
ahead.
these women's organizations, right? I mean, women's publications, sorry. So Real Simple is one that might be open to a pitch like that. That's a reach. They're very hard to penetrate. I can tell you right now that AARP sounds like a fit, but I write for them and they're really hard to penetrate, really hard to penetrate. It's very, very hard. I mean, I've been working for them for 7 years and I'm still having problems moving up the food chain. So somebody gets in there, but they're very difficult. So maybe take it to, I would say, the local NPR outlet, or there's a business podcast that's really influential for some of the audiences you think would be most interested in this story. Yeah, but it does have a lot of general appeal. So just a general newspaper or statewide magazine might work as well.
That's great. And we've got somebody from the audience who'd like to come up and do their pitch. Can we do another one with you?
Yeah, let's do it. I love doing these. I can do these.
I'm actually going to bring Marco up live so he can ask his question. He has, I'll let him, he'll pitch it here. So here comes Marco Schmidt.
Hi, Marco.
He'll be up in just a sec. Let's see. He'll be rejoining.
There we go.
All right. How you doing, Marco?
I'm good. You have my video stopped, but
let me switch that. Go ahead and introduce yourself.
Hi, Joanne. I'm with InBizWorks, and we've created an online course. And I'd like to try this pitch situation that you're talking about, Entrepreneur Magazine, and how I might get a reporter's attention.
Yep.
Okay, so it's a common statistic that every year about 1 million people start a new business in this country. And every year about 50% of those fail.
Right.
This has been going on for decades. And add to that the fact that there's a pandemic that has put over 40 million people out of work. There's literally a tsunami of people who are going to be wanting to start a new business.
Right.
However, business incubators and entrepreneurial support organizations have not been doing a good job.
Amen. I totally agree.
There's, this huge failure rate. I developed an online course that's based on working for 2 years, helping hundreds of people start and grow new businesses, that builds on the one factor that makes a difference over whether or not a business succeeds after 3 years or to 5 years, and that's business incubation. We've created an online virtual business incubator, and we're working now with entrepreneurship support organizations like accelerators and incubators to provide an online course that supports a person while they build their business, and that becomes an integral part of the entrepreneurial support organization.
So first of all, I'm going to push back on your statistics. So it's like the divorce statistics, right? So it's like what, 30% or 50% or something like that of all marriages fail or something like that. I think it's, I don't know where it's at, but it's not 50% of all marriages in any given year. It's over the course of all this lifespan of those marriages. So I would fine tune your statistics there a bit, because it takes more than a year for most businesses to fail. I think restaurants fail in like 7 years or something like that. So I would firm that up for sure.
Yeah, the correct way to state the statistic is that within 5 years, 50% of all new startups fail.
Now that's okay. I think that's a Kaufman statistic, isn't it?
That's been validated by the Kaufman Foundation, the SBA. It's an old statistic.
Right. Okay, so that's really important. If you're going to hook on that statistic, I know it's a little tedious to have to put those qualifiers in there, but if I'm the reporter and I have to push back immediately on that, your credibility's gone down. So
gotcha.
Yeah, so watch that. Okay, so you're saying that the silver bullet for business success is incubators, but I want to know, it's not the incubator itself. There's something happening inside the incubator. What is it? Is it the mentoring? Is it the like the personal board of directors type of dynamic? Is it the peer networking? What is within that incubator dynamic? What is the most important force that?
Yeah, the most significant factor is actually peer-to-peer mentoring.
Yeah.
And
Okay.
the statistic is that businesses that launch with incubation stand an 84% better chance of surviving after 5 years than businesses that don't.
So when you think of an incubator, I typically think of a university-sponsored tax advantage thing, like a building at the outskirts of Northwestern, which is where I went, and I think of labs, and I think of there's a tech incubator in the Merchandise Mart in Chicago where there's shared services and that kind of thing.
There's about 2,000 of them in the United States.
Yeah. So what you're saying is that the real secret to why incubators work isn't where they are, but the relationships that are developed. And further, it's not the relationships with experts, it's the relationships with people who are sharing the journey. Is that correct?
It's a combination of access to mentorship, access to potential funders, lenders, and other sources of social and financial capital. It's also the connections that occur between entrepreneurs, because it's quite frequent that two or more people in a cohort or in a past cohort actually team up and start and pivot and do a new business. But the real problem here is that there's a bottleneck in terms of how many people can be served by incubators, because it's a very expensive process. By having an online component that would standardize the training, upskill people to the point where the mentoring really makes sense and provide continuity between cohorts, that's where the real online virtual incubator platform becomes an accelerator.
So when you say continuity of cohorts, to put that into English, you're saying you've got people you've got friends and professional colleagues who you have enough in common with that you actually can put together 1 and 1 and get 3.
That's really true, but then actually you could get 1 and 1 gets 4, because one of the things that occurs with continuity between cohorts is that people who have gone on and been successful can come back and be mentors. They could be potential funders, and they could be potential employers.
Yeah. So that's the long potential. Okay. That's the really long game there. I get that you're creating this, the potential has a lot of potential return on investment down the road. But I'm really kind of hung up on this dynamic of it's the peers, and it's peers who are not just literally in the same space, but what do they share that when you say this continuity of cohort, what is underneath that? Is it stage of life? Is it the technical type of problem that they're trying to solve? Is it the market that they're trying to serve?
I think it has more to do with the fact that an online community provides an enduring brand that allows people to plug in and gain, you know, a sense of engagement and a desire to continue to contribute even after their cohort is over. While
So
the
you
cohort
find
is
it a band of brothers, kind of.
right,
Got it. So that's the dynamic. So for all of the money and the tax advantages and the real estate that universities and companies and VCs and municipalities have put into physical on-site incubators, the real dynamic is one that's more universal and more accessible than anybody ever knew. And that is having a band of brothers or sisters that you can rely on for not just inspiration and encouragement, but to find opportunities together that none of you could have discovered alone. Is that correct?
right.
Got it. There's your story.
You know, and so that's all really good, but let's take it just like a little bit deeper, which is tying it back to what everybody on this call is interested in, is how do I promote my course, my online course? Because
So your course is the setting that replaces the physical incubator, correct?
right.
Right. So I haven't read this story. I mean, I have not read this. I mean, I think we're at a place in the news cycle where everything is like, oh, XYZ happened on site, now it's happening online. It's like just dominoes, right? So, but I haven't read this one. So I think you've got a really good shot at approaching, you need to, the Wall Street Journal obviously is a destination for this story. I think you need to validate the messaging with a less ambitious outlet. Where are you based?
Taos, New Mexico.
Okay. So there's probably a New Mexico Business Journal.
Right.
Approach them.
Okay.
Because the fact that you're on site, I mean, your geographic location is the validation for approaching that publication. And
Yeah.
I get it that it feels a little counterintuitive with the fact that you've got a platform that's national or, you know, international, but that still is going to get you that step up into that publication because you're local and they want local stories. And people in New Mexico are really hungry for stories that show that they're national players. And there's also a lot of hunger out there for stories that show how distributed economic improvement or business development, let me back up. There's a lot of hunger for showing how that economic development and growth can be more democratic and distributed. Because now that we're aware of how important it is to have universal broadband, there's kind of this thread going through a lot of coverage of, wait a minute, how does social distancing scale up so that we've got businesses across the country being successful more evenly? So you play into that. That's the ROI for your positioning as the course creator, that you're part of this big conversation of how can economic development happen across the country in overlooked rural and small towns. I understand that Taos is a destination. People will more readily recognize it geographically than they would some other small towns, but it probably doesn't spring to mind as a hotbed of innovation or conferences or something like that. So you're in a really, actually that's a real sweet spot because it's recognizable, but people don't assume that there's a lot of innovation coming out of there. So that's the really big conversation that's happening. If we're all going to be, if real estate is now disconnected from economic development, how does that happen? How does economic development happen? If it's happening virtually, it could happen anywhere. Where is anywhere? What is anywhere? Taos is anywhere. If it can happen in Taos, it can happen anywhere. Now you've got your hook.
Wow, you're good.
I'm very good.
Thank you.
You're welcome. I think it's awesome. I think it's a really good story. I haven't heard it. If you're affiliated or working in any way with Kauffman or any of the any economic development organization, hook on to them. Make sure that, first of all, make sure you got your messaging right. But work with them to see what types of reporters they work with. And another way to kind of, break gravity and start getting some coverage is to work with those business partners and do a joint appeal. So if they've got any kind of connections with reporters, approach them together.
So are you talking about, like, say, for example, I'm right now we are actually in a business accelerator called Activate New Mexico.
Mm-hmm.
So you're saying work through their system to see what reporters they've already worked with, and then do a joint thing, because they can say, oh, look at this cool thing that we're promoting.
Right. That's right. You serve as their case study for success.
Right.
And then that's how you develop the relationship with the reporter. And then you become a credible source on your own. And then you can use some of your clients as the basis for success.
Neat. Yes, that's a cool strategy.
Yeah, so you kind of daisy chain it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Cool.
Go use them as cover. Use them as like the umbrella and kind of borrow their coattails.
Are you up for a follow-up conversation
Sure.
later on?
Yep.
Thank you so much, Joanne.
You're welcome. I love New Mexico. I've got a really good friend there. And I've also talked with their economic development people and the sovereign wealth management people. Uh-huh. And they do have a really strong hunger for being on the national scene. So I would suspect that there's some pretty good opportunity there for joint pitching of national media, I would guess.
Cool. Thank you.
Marco, thanks for coming up. Appreciate it.
Who else can we do this with? This is so much fun.
Let's see here. All right. Oh, Marco, by the way, John has some questions for you in the chat. Are we kind of at the end of the presentation? Is this Q&A time or?
Yeah, there's my awesome last slide. Sorry.
No, it's okay. Should we drop the handout or save that?
Yep, let's drop the handout.
All right. For those of you who are here with us, we're going to put a link to the handout in the chat. You can click on that. It's going to open up a tab on your browser. In the top right is a download button. So you can hit that up. Joanne, I got to say, it's awesome watching you like do journalism live, like taking the source and then like converting it into something that's just like helping modify it and find the story. It's a thing to watch to see your 40 years of experience. Like, all right, there's something here. Let's pull on this. What's under that? What's over here? I'm like, in my mind, I'm like, oh my gosh, I wish I had you on my team to write headlines, and like just the way your mind works. I'm like, whoa, this is super cool. Like finding the threads. It's an art and a science, I'm sure.
Well, it took me, in all honesty, my first 3 books, I did not understand all this stuff. And I tried to go out there on the basis of what I had written the book about. And I did get some good PR. I mean, I got good PR because they were good books. But after I started to figure this stuff out, when I kind of decided to branch into, this media training stuff, and frankly, in the last 2 recessions ago, I approached the PR for my Career Lattice book completely differently. And I used all these techniques and I got 80 media mentions in 4 months.
Wow.
I was just like, holy Toledo, this stuff really works. So I've been through these cycles. I mean, I know how much you have on the line. I mean, I wanted to sell books, but everybody wanted to know I had applied the techniques in the Career Lattice to myself. And I was just like, I'm tired of talking about myself, but everybody wanted to know what were these pivotal moments that I had as an individual navigating, and obviously for all of us, we don't know what the next steps are. You can only do your best with the information that you have. Nobody wanted to know about how I researched the book, about how I came up with these really cool graphic for the book. My peers as journalists wanted to know how I got the deal. And I told them I literally got the deal by getting an agent in an elevator with an elevator pitch. Everybody loves it. So, I know. So I was at a conference and I had paid extra to go to pitch a novel, but I didn't read the directions. And so I ended up in this really horrible critique group that the guy was like, you don't have a novel, you don't even have a headline. I wanted to just cry. But
Right.
one of the agents who was on the panel really liked her. And I had some ideas for business books and women in careers and career pathing that I'd been kind of noodling on. And I hadn't written a book in a while. And I was like, maybe I'll write another book. So I really liked this one agent. And I hung out by the elevators and ambushed her and got on the elevator with her, introduced myself. And I said, I do a lot of work researching career pathing and for women, and how women can accelerate their careers by taking lateral moves as well as going up. And it applies to men, but it especially is relevant for women because they're navigating caregiving. And she said, hold on, we're going to get off at the mezzanine. She goes, I forgot to say in my presentation that I was looking for business books. This is what I'm looking for. She said, we're going to get off at the mezzanine. I'm going to sign you right now. And I just have to call my next appointment, tell them I'm going to be late. And that's how I got my agent. Bang. That was it.
That's awesome.
Yeah. And so a lot of people wanted to know, and I was pitching my book about that, because writers are always interested about that. And that became part of the backstory. That's who I was, right? It's like, how did I make a career move that's significant for a writer to get a big book deal? That's a lateral move. So I was able to kind of fashion that. But then people also wanted to know how I had applied the strategies of the book to my own self, having been a freelancer and then navigating to the newsroom after 23 years of experience, and then going back to freelancing for a little while, because 2008, and then going to Tribune as a content manager for brands on the business side, which I did because I wanted to learn how to develop a website and the content and the wireframes from the ground up. I never had the opportunity to do that. So I used lateral moves to gather strategic corporate experience that's now rolled up to help me get bigger and bigger clients as a freelancer. So that story about how I used my own advice, everybody wanted to know that. Even if they didn't use it for the story, everybody wanted to know that. So that kind of nailed it for me, that these techniques really work.
Because it wasn't about your expertise. It was like your story of how
Who
you
I
applied
was.
it. Yeah,
That's
yeah.
who I was. That's right.
Well, we've got a bunch of general questions for you.
Okay.
It's common in websites, especially for experts or authorities or whatever, to have like a press page.
Yep.
Like,
Please have one. Please have one. Please have one.
What do we put on there? Like, let's imagine we're an expert in whatever. What do we put on there?
Great question. And I can tell you how unbelievably frustrating it is to want to quote somebody and to not be able to find the right person. And do not send me to the hello@yourwebsite.com. Don't do that.
Yeah.
So you need two channels for your media. So you just have either media or press. That's the tab. And underneath that, you want what you're saying and what's been said about you. What you're saying is your press releases, your about, okay?
Yeah.
Even if it's elsewhere on the website, you want your about. Either the bios or links to the bios of your corporate leaders. If you possibly can do a company timeline on one page, please do one.
Yeah.
High-res headshots.
All right. You were ready for this question.
This drives me crazy. And let me just say, make sure, and I can't believe I have to say this, but there's a backstory. Make sure that your information in your bios is consistent with your LinkedIn bio. Because we have had to cut people out of stories at the Tribune and for other publications I've worked with, because we get to the point of editing and the person's career, their title, or the spelling of their name, or some aspect of their career position is inconsistent with what they told me and what's at their website versus LinkedIn. Make sure they're consistent. And even more than that, spell your name correctly.
Yeah.
The most humiliating correction I ever had as a newspaper editor was when I fact-checked the spelling of somebody's name against their own email signature, and it was incorrect.
That's
in
not
their
good.
own email signature. Get your stuff together. Make it consistent. We do not have time, and there is no tolerance for that stuff. You get to the end of a story, and if you've survived being picked by the reporter, being vetted, but the reporter has to get the story signed off on by the editor, even while they're reporting. So the short list gets shorter then the editor edits it, then the copy editor gets hold of it, and then there's space considerations even online, so you can't go on endlessly. If you survive all that stuff and you get cut because your own name is spelled wrong, you deserve it. I mean, think of how disappointing that is. It's like you came so close. Okay, so on your website, you've got what I'm saying about myself: press releases, bios, high res headshot, company timeline, and where you're located, like basic contact information. So like, you see in a story, XYZ company, based in Canton, Ohio. Don't make me scratch around for that.
Yeah.
Okay, and then the other column is what people have said about us, media mentions.
Do podcasts count?
Sure. Yeah. Anything with a logo. You don't have to, just, slap on the logo and then the link. Always grab that story and do a PDF of it, because stuff disappears in the web all the time. You guys know this. That stuff disappears all the time because you're making it disappear sometimes. But stuff disappears all the time. Grab all your mentions and so that you can put up a PDF. And that's all you need. But make it easy, and then monitor that email. Get back to people. I mean, I chase people endlessly. I chase people on Facebook trying to track them down because there is no way for me to find them at their own websites. It is a point of profound frustration on the part of journalists. So make it easy, because I don't want to have to, it's not my job to have to go back through Crunchbase or something and find you.
Yeah.
But if I want to find you, I will.
Can you, like if somebody's going to do, like press page is nice for inbound, like interest from the press, but if you're going to go out, can you kind of give us a, like compare and contrast between somebody who's trying to get a hold of press, what like maybe an amateur, like not very professional approach looks like versus a really quality approach?
Sure.
Yeah.
No, I know what you mean. How to not make an ass of yourself. Got it.
Yeah.
Yeah. So number one amateur mistake is I want free coverage. Number two, well, actually tied with number one, is I'm an advertiser. Nobody cares. There's supposed to be a church state wall between the newsroom and the advertising side. It's getting very Swiss cheesy. It's getting very permeable.
Okay.
Publications, news media, as they're having, the business model is crumbling. The First Amendment is not a guarantee of income or revenue. That's a hard truth for journalists. There's a lot of fear out there. So they don't, but just because you're an advertiser, nobody cares. In fact, you get struck from the list because that's just hopeless. I can't do anything with that. Another thing that is the mark of a rank amateur is to demand that you get to see the story before it gets published. So this is problematic because when you're interviewing somebody, people don't talk in a straight line. I'm not doing it right now. You start a thought and then you interrupt yourself, or you develop the same thought in different ways over several sentences. So my challenge as a reporter is, am I going to quote you on what you said, literally, or am I going to quote you on what you meant? And this is where the accusation of misquotes come in.
Because you were doing it live with us a little bit. You were like workshopping what we were saying. You're like, I think what you're actually saying is this.
Exactly. Thank you. Yeah. So my process, I've actually become a big fan of the process of showing people only the quotes that I'm going to attribute to them in the story. They don't get to see the whole story. It is reasonable to ask to see any quote, any direct quote. And if the reporter agrees to that, and they don't have to, because everything you say is on the record, but if the reporter agrees to that, that's a courtesy. You're not reopening the interview. You're not doctoring it. You're not, quote unquote, correcting it. It is a chance for you to ensure that what you intended to say is being conveyed. And I don't like corrections. I hate corrections. They're embarrassing. It makes me want to cry. I hate corrections. So I present it to people as, because we both want this story to be correct, I am asking you for an affirmation of factual accuracy. I want you to tell me affirmatively, is this quote correct? Does it need greater clarification? Or does it need an actual factual correction? I call it the 3C test. So is it correct? Does it need to be clarified, like with context? or does it actually need a correction? And inevitably, I get back something that usually it's like, we've attached this with, this Word document and all the review, is on. There's like 17 people on it. And I'm just like, I can't even with you people. And they always like want to jam in some stupid marketing stuff. So then I have to work with that. But I would rather work with that than have a correction. But I can tell you what happened just last week. I interviewed somebody, a big deal, it's senior vice president of a major consumer lender. And I went through my whole thing. I'm going to ask you for affirmation of factual accuracy. And I quoted her completely correctly. In fact, she said this thing 3 times. What she said was that her communication style was that you needed to over communicate because in this pandemic, because if you didn't over communicate, then you couldn't blame people for not understanding. I don't even think that's controversial. In fact, I was just kind of like, that's the best thing that she said. She wasn't that great. So that's a quote that I sent her. She sent me back this email that said, I did not say this, and I would never say this. So she accused me of fabricating a quote. She's no longer in the story. It's a cover story for the biggest publication in her industry. So if a reporter gives you the courtesy of letting you look at the quote to ensure accuracy, respect that process. Don't accuse them of fabricating a quote. And if you have additional information that genuinely adds context, say, I came across this additional information. I didn't say it. Here's additional information. You're not going to get quoted on everything you said. It's not a transcript, it's an article. You're not the only voice. The article has to comply with the publication style. If you get a reporter who works with you on fact checks like that, you should thank your lucky stars, because a lot of people just say, I'm going to quote what they said. And if that's not what they meant, then they should have said it better. And I know what that feels like, having been quoted for my books. So I try not to do that to my sources. But if somebody's not going to cooperate with that, if they're going to accuse me of fabricating a quote, where did you think I got it? Do you know what I mean? I'm like, really? Where did you, come on. So she's out of the story. So, so those are some marks of real amateurism. Talking about, your supposed economic clout by being an advertiser, openly saying that you want to be covered because it serves your goals. I mean, reporters know it's transactional. You don't need to throw it in our face. We get that. We understand that you have your motivation, but you need to be serving my goal of producing a story that serves my audience. So here's what does work. Read the publication. I know that sounds agonizingly basic, but make sure that you're pitching something that the publication would actually cover or that's consistent with what they cover. So think about their audience, their key audience. And maybe if it's a sports audience, don't be pitching cosmetics, I mean, I'm just saying. So just narrow it down a bit. And that's frustrating because you don't necessarily know what they're considering. Maybe they're going to do a pivot. I don't know. But at least narrow it down so that you're not pitching something just, you're not just splattering it out there. Try to think about, if you're really unsure, fall back to the calendar. Every reporter, every editor is ambushed by Christmas. Oh my gosh, it's Christmas. What are we going to do? How did that happen? Boy, that crept up on us. Speaking as somebody who shops on December 26th of the next year, I don't understand this mentality. So they are going to be in a white hot panic starting about 4 weeks before any given holiday or calendar event or point in the business cycle. So another way to think about it is if some of the clients that you work with, if they have a particular cycle, like for Marcus, if there's a particular funding cycle for SBA loans, I don't know if there is, I don't think there is, but if there is a particular funding cycle to SBA loans, and that there's going to be a lot of panic out there in the streets, when XYZ deadline comes up. then you can back up and pitch saying, hey, your readers are going to be freaked out about this thing, or moms are going to be freaked out, the first week of December about what to give kids, the kids' teachers for Christmas, or solve a problem for the reporter and the editor. And I guarantee you that if you find things in the calendar, either the consumer calendar or the business cycle calendar, that are predictable, that if you're thinking about it in advance, the reporter is already afraid of it. They're already like, you have to come up with a new story. Can't do what you did last year. Solve that problem. And the problem could be solved with a fresh angle on an ongoing problem, right? So the pandemic is forcing everything to the virtual realm. We have an unending appetite for how do you do in the virtual realm what we already know how to do in real life. Everything from business relationships to economic development to incubators to regular family stuff. All of our relationships are now bridging virtual and real. And how do we figure out which function is best suited for which environment, and then how do we make that happen? So that's kind of where we're at right now. So if you can translate your pitch to some aspect of this moment that we're in and how you're solving a problem, you're probably going to get a good reception. Make it super short. The reporter's not your friend. You're not developing a relationship in the normal sense. It is transactional. You're giving them information, right? You've got statistics or the news trend you're hooking into. You've got your expertise. You've got your case studies and examples, and you've got your tips. Focus in on one of those as kind of your wedge. Make it short, sweet, say what you have to say. Link to the Who We Are section of your website and get out of it.
Wow, that's awesome.
Yeah, that's how you do it. I mean, I'm your worst enemy and your best friend, right? I do not have patience. I get about 400 emails a day from news feeds. I have no patience. But when I find a story I want, I am on it and I'm going to stick with it. Right now, the thing that I'm obsessing about is what is my client digital privacy news? Subtitle, you're paranoid for a reason. Right now, I'm really obsessing about the accountability of government contractors for the private companies that are contracting for data to governments. So you have sunshine laws for the government, but what is the requirement of those contractors, or is there one, to comply with the sunshine laws? So in other words, how come outsourced work doesn't have the same level of transparency as a government agency that's outsourcing it? That's a problem, man. That's a problem.
Yeah.
That's the story.
I got some more questions coming in.
Yep.
Nancy from Facebook is asking, you've kind of touched on this, but how to create relationships with reporters when starting from scratch. Marco just asked if it was possible to connect. Like you've mentioned, come, be concise, have a press page, talk about the data, have case studies, analyze them, provide tips. What else can somebody do if they're trying to develop a relationship with one or like a whole portfolio of reporters?
So first of all, concentrate on the reporters and the
So be
outlets.
strategic, like don't just
Reach
spray
the
and pray.
audience. Reach the audience that's most important to you.
Yeah.
Everybody wants to be the New York Times and the Wall Street Journal. You're probably not going to get your actual business results that you want by being in the Wall Street Journal or the New York Times. And that's because there's a lot of wasted readers. I'm probably a wasted reader for most articles, right? You want to zero in on the audience that's most congruent with your market. And trade publications are really overlooked. They're kind of, people think, oh, I only got quoted in, Shoe Leather Monthly or whatever it is.
Right.
But if you're selling shoelaces, those are your people.
Right.
So how to develop a relationship. Okay, so start closer to home. Start with those audiences start with what your readers read. You want to be read by the people who can make business decisions for your company, right? So it will feed your ego to get quoted in a big flashy news outlet, but it's going to be really hard to translate that to actual return because there's so many wasted readers. It will not feed your ego as much to be quoted in the publication that is most closely followed by your audience or by your market, but that's where you're going to get your return. So I do a big research project for women in accounting, and we have been quoted in the Wall Street Journal. I was really happy a few years ago when we were able to profile. It was an absolute, it was actually an absolute masterstroke. I had been cultivating a relationship with their work-life reporter. She's retired now, Sue Schellenbarger. She lived in Evanston, Illinois. I lived there for a while. I sent her statistics from our latest report, our annual report about women in accounting. She said they were interesting, but it wasn't as compelling. She didn't really see the story. So I said to her, okay, full disclosure, I've got a couple of firms that are corporate sponsors of this project, but because of that, I know them really well. And I know that it's a real issue for leaders of accounting and consulting firms to advance women. That's the whole point of this research project, but it's especially a problem to advance women of color. Would you be interested in profiling how one firm, and it happens to be one of the sponsors, totally upfront about it, but I know the story because they're a sponsor, because I have a close relationship with them. Would you be interested in how one set of partners, who are all white guys, overcame their reluctance to promote a woman who was Native American because they didn't think she had the stuff to be a leader? And it turned out that it was partly Native American culture and like this communication gap because of the Native American culture and how she navigated the corporate work world being Native American woman and in this really traditional firm. And Sue was like, oh my gosh, yes. Bullseye. Absolute bullseye. So we did a profile of how these partners had to think differently about what is a leader, and how this woman also had to say, my culture tells me that this is the definition of a leader, but my employer tells me that I need to be slightly different, and my own professional ambition tells me that I've got to stretch. And she almost gave up. But the partners told each other, leaders look like not just like us. We think she has what it takes. And she did reach out to some girlfriends and some female peers, and she pulled it together. And her first attempt at being a partner, they didn't choose her, and she was really bummed. She almost quit. But it was actually partly because of her Native American culture and some friends she had who said, no, you have got to stick it out. And those relationships actually helped her stay the course. And she became a partner in their Bellingham office in Washington. And now she mentors other Native American women who are interested in accounting as a career. I'm sorry, I love that. And it was like a 25-inch profile in the Wall Street Journal. So the accounting thing is the baseline. They're all everyone can do a tax return, they're accountants. But it's really the human story about how this one person had to navigate this really tricky terrain of her personal culture, her heritage, and intersecting that with a very traditional corporate culture, and how the corporate leaders had to change themselves to recognize a different form of leadership that really could bring in additional business, because now they've got a hook into the Native American community, but they got somebody who thinks differently, who can see different opportunities.
Wow, that's awesome.
I was so happy for my client. I was so happy for her, because that's the kind of voice that isn't typically told. So when we think about all this crazy diversity stuff that's happening and how difficult it is to see like what those news relationships are, this is an example of the story that we want to come out of those discussions in the newsroom.
That's fantastic.
It took me a year of working with Sue. So I had the statistics about how Native American women were underrepresented because of the research project that I manage. But I was also able to bring her the person that exemplified those statistics and a successful feel-good story.
That's great. One question about somebody who's like kind of an expert first, and they're very much likely to make the mistake of, I'm awesome, I know all these things, you
Yeah.
should write about it.
Yeah.
To help them like switch gears and say, it's not I'm awesome by my stuff, it's like, you're cool and all, but where's the data and where's the story? If we need to help find data, like let's say we're just not used to that, like we're just an operator in whatever our niche is in business or relationship science or health and fitness, whatever it is, where do we go to like get
Sure.
data that we can quote
Yeah.
and feel good quoting it, like not like we're stealing the data or whatever?
Right.
Like,
First of all, there's trade associations.
yeah.
I mean, they exist to aggregate data, right?
Okay.
So that's number one. You also have, it's trailing data, but the Bureau of Labor Statistics and the Census Bureau, they're kind of overlooked. They put out tons of reports. So in all honesty, like if you're bored, you just flop there in the sofa at 10 p.m., you're looking on your iPad, just take a look at some of their news releases. You might find some pretty good stuff. Another thing is oftentimes states will do economic development and trend data that's broken down by industries. So what you're looking for is the intersection of your business success and where it's starting to come more and more. So the trend that you're seeing in your own business with that data. So you can say, oh, I'm an example of that data. So if I was a blueberry grower in Michigan, I would have Blueberry Association data. I would also have the Ag Department of Michigan overall data. And if I said, oh my gosh, I'm finding that blueberries are actually selling, you'd think that Whole Foods or those types of places would be, my biggest channel for sales, but oh my goodness, there's actually this one county where blueberries are taking off, and you find out, I'm just totally fabricating this, you find out that there's like a bunch of ex-Amish people that are like selling some kind of crazy brand, and they're buying all these blueberries, and all of a sudden you've got this, now there's a story. And so you just basically kind of drill down into that data to find you need to find the people who are behind that data. So where you've got momentum with your business, if you're seeing growth, if you're seeing liftoff, if you're seeing an intensity in your client base, then you want to find data that creates a context around that, and then you've got a story.
I think John had a comment about that, how disruption, it needs to be more than just anecdotal or whatever. Like there's got to be some data to back it up than just a claim, right?
Yeah, so it works both ways. I mean, when I get, or any reporter gets a data dump, you're just like, nobody cares about these numbers. You need to find a person who exemplifies the data. Like, I started this whole presentation with the gal who's, sitting there, doing her little course, and Udemy is like, we got 1 million people, we got jillions of course creators, but here's the one. So if you got a bunch of data, the reporter is going to have to find somebody who exemplifies that. Just because you have somebody doing something, there may or may not be part of a trend. So there's two ways to kind of view the kind of that unusual person. You could say so-and-so is part of a trend, so they're an example of the trend. Or you could say the trend is over here.
They're bucking the trend.
Inexplicably, so-and-so is over here doing this. So, the world is zigging and this person's zagging. So what the heck? So when that sort of story is often, the Wall Street Journal has a feature on the cover pretty much every day. So those light features are often examples of people zagging. So if you kind of want to track that, that sort of thing, they'll pick up on that sort of thing. I mean, I'm personally kind of really curious as to how the Renaissance Fair people are going to navigate this whole experience of the virtual world. And I do some travel writing, and I'm like just kind of sort of tracking that to see how they're going to do that. And there's starting to be a few inklings now in like some of the news feeds that I subscribe to about how the Renaissance people are getting a grip on this. And I'm going to be pitching that at some point to a couple publications I write for, because I just think that's the craziest thing. It's like, how would you make the Renaissance Fair virtual? Like, I'm all about it. I know. So.
Well, one more question before we sign off. It's more on the own media side, although it could come in handy when sending a pitch to press. How do we write like if we're writing our own blog post or whatever, if we're writing a headline or an email subject line, how do we write a really awesome headline or hook, if you will?
Verbs. Use
Okay.
verbs.
Okay.
That's
What's
it.
can you tell us an example, like straight up, or maybe what's a bad example of a headline with no verbs?
Well, there probably wouldn't be one in a publication. But let's see.
Verbs imply action, like something
Verbs
is
are
happening.
action. Yeah.
What? Yeah.
Verbs are action. We've got kind of a saying in journalism and writing in general that you have to be able to say, if you can't say a concept in 10 words or less, then you don't know what that concept is.
Okay.
So I'm working on a novel right now. And yesterday when I was quilting, I've been working on this, well, I work on a bunch of novels, but I've got this one that's got kind of this complicated scenario of, I mean, bear with me here. It's like basically like algorithms and artificial intelligence and intersecting with actuarial realities, actuarial realities being the expected life expectancy of somebody, right? So like, when does somebody die? So, and how much economic, what's the economic intersection of your expected lifespan and, how much money might you make and all that kind of thing. Okay, great. So that's kind of like this big complicated, I tend to overcomplicate things, this big complicated world, that I'm kind of like stewing about while I'm doing my patchwork. And I'm trying to think of how can I boil this down? I want to bring this to my agent. How can I boil this down to less than 10 words, less than 10 words, less than 10 words? And I got it. I've been thinking about this for a year and I finally got it. It's your worth before birth.
Wow.
So the concept of the novel is that the economic value of a person is determined by 12 weeks gestation. And that's the concept. That's the world we're living in. Your worth before birth. So bang, you get it, right? So in that little scenario, the word worth is the verb. It's well, I guess worth is a noun. Worth before birth. Okay, so I'm contradicting myself here.
Is though, like that's an identity thing.
Yeah, it's what your worth before birth. Anyway, it doesn't have to rhyme, but short, punchy verbs are really helpful. They often convey a lot more than just the motion or the action. So somebody went across the street versus somebody skipped across the street versus somebody ran across the street versus somebody chased across the street. Somebody crossed the street. But how they did it is all packed into that verb. So the connotation of the verb is going to convey tone, oftentimes somebody who shuffles across the street is either, they're not in very good physical shape, maybe temporarily or permanently, right? Versus somebody who trotted across the street, who is purposeful but not panicked, right? So think about a verb that packs in a ton of meaning and get it down to below 10 words. Worth before birth. What's your worth before birth? That tells you everything about this world. Everything is determined before you're even born. What is this family going to do? They're unexpectedly pregnant. Oh my God, right? Don't you want to read this novel? So, yeah, it's all in the verbs. Lead with your verbs. If you nail the verb, you've got your message.
I love that. Joanne Cleaver, I want to thank you for coming on. This has been a real treat. I know, thank you those of you who attended live. By the way, Ivy Pan is the winner of the free year of the LifterLMS $99 add-on. So shoot us an email, team@lifterlms.com, and we'll hook you up. I know I'm going to be referring, Joanne, a lot of people to this episode or to this webinar because, people ask us a lot about, how do I get exposure? I spent all this time making this course, or I've developed this expertise. How do I get out there? And I mean, it's a black box, and you just gave us a peek into it. And I'm super grateful for you for doing that. Can you tell us about the Career Lattice again, and your course that's coming, and any way else people can connect with you or find out more about what you're up to?
Sure, thank you. Well, thank you for having me. I mean, I love doing these, and it's a public service to be able to explain to people how it works, because it's so frustrating to be on the other side. And I'm really grateful for the opportunity just to, help other entrepreneurs understand how it works. So the Career Lattice will be launching in July, and I've been doing corporate corporate trainings and individual workshops based on this book that summarizes the strategy of moving over to move up. So people who want to advance in their careers can best navigate that these days by looking at strategic lateral moves, sideways opportunities, either short-term or medium-term, that can give them the expertise, the connections, and sometimes the technical and business skills that they need to qualify for their destination job. So I'm going to be launching a series of probably 5 courses that are geared for specific audiences. So there'll be a Career Lattice course for caregivers, because that's a very different situation than somebody who doesn't have that as a primary responsibility in their life. One will be latticing from a corporate job or a staff job to entrepreneurship, because as Marcus can tell us, one of the great fallacies of entrepreneurship in America is that it's taking a leap or taking the plunge. And so those two verbs, right, leap and plunge, imply
Danger,
recklessness,
yeah,
jumping into the unknown, and an utter and complete lack of risk management. And in truth, the Kauffman Institute tells us that the most successful entrepreneurs are people with at least 20 years of experience who are very good at assessing risk. So I'm applying that framework to the transition from being a staffer to being self-employed. So I've broken it down into 5 steps that help you minimize your personal and financial risk and maximize your chances of success by using these lateral moves, either if you're at work or recently have left work, how you can use your corporate and industry experience and connections to engineer a smooth, minimally risky transition to self-employment. This is especially important for people who are approaching retirement, the newly or nearly retired, as I like to say. So we'll also be doing a couple of versions of the course for people at different points in their careers. I'm going to be doing one for journalists. It'll be a little bit self-serving. I'm going to it's going to be the Staff to Self-Employment and the Career Lattice for Journalists are going to be the first 2 that we roll out. And I'm going to be bringing the journalism version to my community of panicked, freaked out journalism colleagues and some friends. And I'm going to be using these techniques that we just discussed for the last however long to get their attention, because they're freaking out and they know that they have to make a transition. So I'm going to be using the moment that we're in right now to say, did you leave journalism, or did journalism leave you? If you have to figure out your next career moves, take this course, and it'll first of all help you figure out if there's a path forward for you in journalism. Secondly, how you can make peace with the fact that you're going to have to start selling, whether you're in traditional journalism or if you're going out to self-employment of some sort. And finally, how you can preserve whatever tattered financial stability you have and build more so that you can actually envision a successful retirement for yourself, because a lot of journalists are really, it's a mess. So I'm going to be hitting on those pain points for them to hopefully help my colleagues. But also, if I get to journalists first, then I'll be showing them how the course works and how the lattice works. And I'm going to be asking them just point blank, if this course has helped you, please consider me as a source for your stories. And in the process of that, they'll be saying, I want to do a course. And I'll say, you should talk to Chris. Here's how awesome Chris is. And I'll be sending them copies of the story that I wrote. I was going to tell you guys how awesome Chris was when I interviewed him. He broke down some of the key success factors for running a course into 5 points. And those 5 points were essentially tips. And I was able to use those to give Chris the last several paragraphs of the story that I wrote for the American Society of Journalists and Authors. He got the last word as the expert, but it was really because he translated it to tips. So I'm doing the course stuff, and I'm continuing to commit some journalism. And I'm continuing to do research projects for associations. And I'm writing novels, which I am revising because I overthought my first version.
So in other words, you're prolific.
I'm prolific and I quilt all the time. Yeah. And I have grandkids and a wonderful husband of 40 years and all that good stuff. So
Awesome.
yeah, I'm really grateful to be part of the LMS community because it is essential. I mean, Marcus, you're absolutely right. You have to have colleagues going through this kind of thing together so that you can ask the questions that you can't ask out there in the real world, because you have to have someone having your back.
Totally. Well, that's Joanne Cleaver. Her link's in the chat. It's jycleaver.com. Joanne, thank you so much for coming on and doing this training with the LifterLMS audience today. We really appreciate it. We will see you around, and I hope you have an amazing rest of your day. Kathy, thanks for helping organize that, and
Thanks,
appreciate
Peggy.
all of you who are still with us here at the end. We appreciate it. We will be posting this training in the LifterLMS webinar vault and on our YouTube channel, so you can always go back and reference it later. Joanne, thank you so much, and I hope everybody has a great rest of your day.
Thanks, everybody.